Hey everybody, what's up? It's Booksy. Today's Wednesday, November 29th. This is going to be a midweek update. I'm liking to see what was going on early in the week with AMC, just kind of walking down from that auto reaction on the bottom. And I've been kind of following other stocks lately as well. I did a big video on AMC about a potential big move up to nearly 15 and then possibly coming back down after that point pretty far. There's more conservative targets in mind. When I'm looking at stuff day to day, I'm not usually thinking, oh, it's going to just rocket end a year all the way up to, somewhere between 13 and 15. I made a pretty strong case for why I think that could happen from a technical standpoint. And then, what comes with that is, of course, the fear of, oh, well, if it follows this channel down, it keeps going, it's going to go to 1. Plenty of people have already commented and said, well, I don't think that can happen. I actually addressed it in the very first part of the video. I'm totally with you if you don't think it can happen. If you think that fundamentally it doesn't make any sense, I don't disagree, okay? So don't get me wrong. When I say stuff like that, I'm talking about things purely from a technical standpoint. And I'm making a case for it because I think that at any given time, when you look at the bear case, the bear thesis for any kind of a stock, usually driving it to under $1, getting it delisted and all this other junk, or forcing there to be a reverse split so you can continue shorting it. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why you might do that, but I think it's a natural end game for a lot of shorts. So, I don't think it's necessarily what's going to happen for AMC. And I made that very clear in that video, but I do see how you could get to that point. So short term, I'm really only looking at a couple targets. It's very, very simple. I've got two main targets in mind locally. Number one is $8. It's a liquid center. It's a floor, a shelf, if you will. We did have a distribution here back in mid-November, a couple weeks ago. And it would be a place that potentially you could have a breakdown and head back down again. You could count as kind of a hook here, going back up to high liquidity to sell off. Now, I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. I'm going to talk about like locally what's going on over the last couple of days. And I want to make a case for why this particular move today is really strong. Number one is that we pushed up and we actually found support on the previous bottom here around 705. And we closed above it, which is a big deal, which means that technically if that can hold as support, right, and it totally could, it's not out of the question that it comes back down. Don't hear me wrong either. We'll talk about that in a minute. But if it does hold as support, this could be the start of a very nice turnaround because you're back inside the previous range. This presents itself then as a kind of a spring and then a return out of the spring. So dipping below to test liquidity and then decent amount of volume buying back in. You can see dropping beneath the floor, coming back above the floor. Good signs overall. Okay, so again, my case for 15 has to be one step at a time, right? And so first thing is $8. Second thing is $9.60. $9.60 is such a huge pivot area in my mind. It is a second liquidity shelf. You can see we spent a lot of time there. It's right where the gap is. I'm finding that there's a lot of evidence right now, including, recent trajectories, but I've got like 5 or 6 others right here, including one of the major uptrends that we have, which, hooked back here on November 10th on it, that intersect around next Friday up here at 960. That has to be kind of like a first stage in order to get to 15. And I really think that when you look at the big picture here and you kind of see where I'm going with this, any kind of a reaccumulation right here helps fill out liquidity that we were sorely lacking right when we came down, and we kind of just never came back. I was constantly thinking we might turn back up and go get that before going down. Instead, we went low first, and then we go up here. So whether or not it distributes there and heads back down, in which case, I think it's going to go back down to about $5, about $4.90. I think that's where the intersection of all these points are. Whether that happens, whether it goes to 8 and then does that, whether it goes to 960 and then does that, we don't know until we get there, right? I think that there's, again, a strong bear case and a strong bull case here for why we might actually be seeing us come way up towards 15. But it's not out of the question. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but it's actually not out of my mind at all. And I'm not going to talk about big picture much more, but it's not out of my mind at all that this could come to 5 first, then go up to 15. I know some of you think that might be a little bit crazy, but if this is what I think it is, and it's a kind of widening, this could just be another act to distribute before trying to drive the price to that next low. And then this ends up being like kind of a 50% halfway point, right? Where you get a strong reaction, you kind of whip around this 50%, right? Maybe come up a little bit high here, up to like 875, and then come back down. And that could just be a way of kind of whipping around in a big S curve around about a 50% marker to get down to 490. So it's not out of my mind that that's a possibility. And I know then at that point you're kind of like, well, wait a minute. Are you saying that you think it could go from 5 to, in like 2 weeks? Yeah, I think it can. And again, it has to do with there being a widening spread here, the volume input, where the RSI is and how it's, interacting on higher time frames. And then, of course, this mirroring aspect. And if you didn't catch that video, I'm not going to explain it right now. So I'm not going to go through it. But if it were to mirror, it would have to do something like that. This would have to come all the way down to some kind of a low, and then rocket back up to near 15. And it is a very important creek check that we just haven't had yet. And again, I'm not going to get into like why or where exactly that is or why that is. I'll show you the chart. And if you want, you can kind of study it for yourself. But this is the two main creeks that we're kind of right between. You can see we're basically right between them both. This is the all-time creek. This is when we jumped, the main downtrend that we jumped when we did that big January run way back. This is it. And it's right below us down here in like the 350s area, which is kind of crazy. That was like a call out I had like a million years ago. Of course, $1 being like this really low extreme. But then up here, this one has not been checked. And we were in that channel, that upper channel, for 2 years. I mean, it was a long time. So it's very odd that that would not be tested. So this concept of like we could be rocketing up to that point, to me, it's not that weird, right? It's kind of like you come up, you find some support here, and then you just come up again. It's a very simple move, and it's a widening move, and then you could have a drop after, or you come down early. We were talking about like 490, which seems crazy, but again, if you have like a lower push here to like 875 and it rejects, you get this kind of like 50% S curve, and then you could have like almost not a squeeze, but almost, right? And then this ends up dropping harshly afterwards as a result of a major breakdown, right? On this widening, something along the lines like this. So from one to the other. And that's basically exactly what happened. I said I wasn't going to show you all this, but that's exactly what happened here in reverse between the two. So is it possible that that's the way that this goes? Sure. I'm not going to say like it has to do this or it has to do that. But what I will say is that locally, thus far, it's looking pretty good. So I'm going to kind of wrap up my video pretty fast today. I don't want to waste a lot of time talking about big picture stuff. I already gave you the $8 area. That's a big one. 960 is another big one. Below us, I had 626 as a possible low, and that came from a lot of different intersections. I think that we already jumped over that creek. You can see that it kind of pushed down right where that intersection is. It was like heading towards it, and then it just sort of stopped. And it was good because it made a higher low here by like a penny, right? So it stayed strong, kind of gave you an indication that the sellers weren't going to be able to push it down. This, to me, I mean, you can see it a bit in the volume, but there's high volume on all of these bottoms here over the last week or so. I think that even though it's descending, I kind of think there's a lot of accumulation going on in these bounces down. Very different from this kind of U-shaped structure that we've had, all the way down where you get those spikes to the upside. Instead, we're spending a lot of time kind of rounding the tops, bouncing down. So this, to me, it looked really accumulative. I did play some calls and got, decent amount. I mean, I think I made like 80% or something, which is good, basically overnight. And yeah, and now, oddly, so what I had thought was that this was going to be a cumulative. This is basically the chart I posted in the Discord, was this line right here. And I said, it looks like it's hooking. It did some weird stuff going into the end of the day on Tuesday. I said it was very strange because they actually pushed up higher than you would expect, and then there was a big sell-off. But right after that, you went into after hours, just rocketed. It was a really bizarre last 15 minutes of the day. Just kind of strange. I think it was meant to look kind of like a sell-off was about to begin, and it looked like it hooked, and then it had this high push, and it looked like it dropped too low. But it closed above it, I think, and then that indicates to me that there could be some strength there, but you're kind of left curious, whoa, what's going to happen? Immediately it starts going after hours. You'll notice that jump was the localist, most local creek. I said the localist. That's funny. But it was the most local creek. And it's the one I said that we kind of needed to get over again in our group. Maybe in the video, I'm not sure if I even looked at that one, but I was looking at these two. We jumped over those pretty early. We found support on the second one on Tuesday. We actually jumped that last week on Wednesday. So, this has been kind of a slow grind, jumping across these trends. We finally got over the last one. We have this big reactive move. The whole market moves to the upside. SPY is doing weird stuff right now. That to me looks a lot like a UT, but I guess it depends on how low it catches. It did not drop the support that might create kind of a head and shoulder, so I'm not positive. I'm going to just kind of wait on that one. It looks like it's up a bit after hours, so we'll see. But here's where things got kind of weird, is that today we basically just saw a reprint. This happens sometimes on AMC where you'll see the print after hours or in extended hours, and then during the day it just basically does the same thing. What's curious to me about this is there's a big buy-in in extended hours, and then the sell-off, you can see right here, it doesn't come back below 682. And 682, you can see the line that I've got there. 682 was my marker for a breakout. So it's instead of what normally happens in a gap up, which is you end up with a gap up that ends up getting filled and screwing you over. In this case, during that extended hour session where that M cross happened here at 682, there was no breakdown. It just kind of was fine. So I had expected it to kind of whip around it and then come low for maybe a spring. And that didn't happen. It came above it, and it actually found support in extended hours, which I don't put a whole lot of stock into that, no pun intended, but there's a big buy-in here. And then the same thing happens again here. And there's an attempted sell-off, but once again, it makes actually a higher low, and it doesn't come beneath either this uptrending creek or that 682. It comes back down to check it around 685 or so, and then returns back to the higher part of the range. And again, it closed above 705. So what appears to me is that you've got a gap down taking you beneath a heavy selling gap down that takes you beneath the range. We're stuck beneath it. And then it seems to me that you have a strong enough buy-in that gets you back above it. And at least for now, it looks like it's found some support on it and it's holding. Now, from here, you might notice I've got some interesting little yellow lines going down. Those are really huge, big macro creek lines that all intercept down here. And I don't know for a fact that it has to hit that marker perfectly at 490 in the future. But usually big old interceptions like that on giant M crosses, we talk about sine wave analysis, usually those indicate some future position of the stock or direction of stock. In this case, they did, because, big picture, you can see that, well, that's exactly where it went. It came down to this area right here where these are intercepting. So whether or not it gets there exactly or not, I don't even think it really matters that much. It's just there. It's already there. So I say that because, again, interestingly, it's kind of hovering around that one today, and it had found support on the middle one, and then we're seeing it's kind of hovering right above it right now. And I don't think this one's super perfect. Last time we messed with it, we gapped above it, and then we actually gapped down beneath it again. So we'll see. I've still got a lot of positivity about going up to at least 8, maybe 875 and then 960. In terms of like whether this could come down or not, I think it could. I mean, technically, if this is a ascending accumulation, you're not going to see this low like this. Instead, you would see it kind of continue up like that. It would start parabolic, and then you get some kind of a big drop later. Maybe after you get to $8.75 or $8, you get like a bigger drop. What that would do is it would take you back down and kind of make this more of a channel instead of it looking like a parabola. So an ascending accumulation here, I'll just delete this for a second. An ascending accumulation here usually is a series of these guys. So you end up with a big explosive move to the upside. Sellers sell, but they don't drive the price any lower. Then you get a lot of buy-in during the day. Usually most of it happens in the first part of the day. And then usually what goes on is that basically every day it does the same thing. And eventually, and what it's doing is it's hopping over creeks, right? And it's not providing you with lower lows. And eventually, this usually gets to be a little silly, like almost parabolic. And then you end up with a pretty gnarly kind of sideways distribution because this will create some kind of a trend, right? And so it'll get parabolic and then it'll go out to meet the trend. And when it finally meets the trend that was established over here, for example, then it breaks down in a dramatic fashion. This causes everybody to start selling off, and it'll catch some other trend that was established. So for example, this is just an example, like I can't prove this hasn't happened yet, but for example, let's say that this is the trend right here. It ends up being the top on this push to the bottom over here on the 21st. You can see that it's kind of similar to what I drew. Maybe we get to the end of that at the very end. And so we've got a couple touch points on it. And then what happens usually is that this will end up breaking down and it looks like it, might even lose that trend or it'll drop. And again, it makes it seem like it's going to break down. And then sometimes, not always, sometimes you'll see it come beneath it for just a minute just to check it. And then you'll get this kind of dramatic turnaround. So this is how an ascending accumulation works. Buy in, and then sellers don't drive the price low. You don't lose creeks. And usually the last one that's checked is kind of the middle M. So if you've got the idea of M's and sine waves and all that jazz on your mind, you can think about this as the double M shape where the second one is a lot more boxy, right? And this is basically the structure that you have. And then what you typically will see is there's some kind of a creek, and I don't know exactly where it'll come from. Maybe from this over here, this previous top. I'd have to look for it. But there's some kind of a creek right here that's being jumped over on the second push. And that's the one that you end up coming back to when it breaks down. It does this parabolic thing, and then it breaks down. It actually is just going back to check like a previous bottom, and also usually a creek that it didn't check on this particular little guy, for example. Now, this has happened, I don't know, half a dozen times, maybe 6 or 7 times on AMC, really clearly. The only reason I'm bringing that one up right now is because we had a repeating action. We had the same thing happen here that happened in extended hours. Normally, what I would be looking for and what I have been looking for before was, I was just like, oh, it's going to come back down to 664 is what I told our Discord group. And after that, I expect it to come up. And this is what I had drawn before. I would expect it to jump this creek, as you see here. And no matter what happens, I always draw the cat ears, but it would distribute and then potentially come back down and check that creek, but do it like lower. And what this is essentially just a spring. Now, you might say like, hey, could it still do that? Yes and no. On the one hand, if this were to happen right now, it would look really nasty, right? I think it would definitely look like a a sell-off is about to occur. It would definitely make a lot of people panic sell for sure, because it looks like a big old cat ear, on RSI and stuff. Technically, this made a higher low, so in my mind, this could be like a phase B top, and you could still come down, and it could take a while, for that matter. I mean, you could take for a long time, right, to come walking back down. Just like you saw here, it could be this really slow, methodical thing. So could that still happen? Yeah, but here's the thing. As this happens, we're going to want to pay special attention to, this creek, this outer one as well, which I didn't even show you how I drew it, but it'll be okay. And then really this bottom, this floor at 705, and the fact that we jumped above it and closed above it, I don't think it's an indication that it can't come beneath it again. That's a silly thing to say in the stock market, but I do think that's a sign of relative strength, and it might be a little weird, right, to have it sell off after this kind of a move at this top. So we'll see. I'm not against it coming back down for some kind of a spring action locally. We're talking about a tiny one, right? But on the big picture, I will say that to me personally, like what makes more sense here is that ascending accumulation model up to like 8. So that's kind of like, if I were going to give them precedence, I'd say, more like 70% ascending accumulation now because of this move, jumping over and holding, and versus normally, I would be more in favor of just kind of a normal range where it comes back down. I don't necessarily think it's going to do that. So we'll see. Tomorrow is going to be a big one. Going into Friday with, of course, Max Payne. So that can always change things. I haven't even looked to see what it is. I'm sure it's $7 or $8, $7.50. Usually it's around the place we are at. So not super unusual. Anyways, we're out of the local trend. We're out of the other creeks. We're out of, the sideways little micro trend here. We're just waiting to see if we go back to test it, which might take us down to 640s, 630s versus an ascending accumulation, which just kind of takes us up. I'll be honest, an ascending accumulation here with that proper pullback and finding some serious support, I think it could be a very, very positive sign that we're going to have that bigger move. I think if it just kind of rockets or if we get something else that's a little different, and we'll see, as time goes on, it might change the way we view what could happen. I think you may have more likelihood of a distributive top if it just kind of goes up and we don't really get any kind of accumulation further here. This kind of a buy-in, though, to me looks pretty strong. So I'm excited. I think that you got to always be a bit, careful. You can't be too excited in the market. Things change really fast. But at least for now, as an initial move back up into the range, it could be a very good one. We'll see if it pans out, and I think if it does, then we really are looking at a potential big move. So that would be really exciting for a lot of people, I think. Again, one more time, just below us, I'm really not looking at much lower than 643 without risk of distribution. It can come a bit lower if it takes longer, but nothing like super, super low. I think that going above us, we want to see it get above 751 at some point. That might even be like on the middle of the M. So you might have one more, right? And then then you get the second part of the bigger one up above it. That would make sense to me just based on this setup, but we'll see. And then it's pretty easy to see. It's like 758, right? And then I think 875 is a big one where there's a gap here. I think that could be one that presents some problems. It's a liquidity shelf as well. Not 850, but 875, and then up to 950, 960 area. So I hope you guys have a good one, and I will catch you probably at the end of the week.